All right, folks, welcome to week 12. We're almost done. Um, so the topic this week is views, and I'm going to go over it lightly because for some unknown reason, somebody in their infinite wisdom decided to include views in level 1 and level 2. So it's a repeat topic. And since I'm teaching you guys the level 2 course, I'm like, you know, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but I do want to cover some of the basic theory stuff first before I do the demos because views have a bit more theory behind them than the stuff we've been doing. Well, I mean, there's lots of theory behind what we've been doing and just ignoring it. But for the views, you actually have to know some of the theory to make them able to use them. Okay, so views are a way, and my database prof from when I was in college will very, if he ever hears me say these still around. You can think of a view as a bookmark. Essentially, you create a query and you give it a name and you store it in the database. Just like with a browser, you create a bookmark to a really long URL and you can call it whatever you want. And when you click on that bookmark, it brings a complicated URL. Same general concept um, to simplify the whole idea. Yeah. It's more like assigning a query to a constant. Because a variable you can change at will. A view you have to redefine. And it's statically stored. So once you've created a view, you can use it like it was a normal table, including with selects and joins and all the fun stuff. Theoretically, you can update the tables associated with the view, the underlying table below the view. Um, however, there's limitations on how you do it, and really we don't cover limitations till level 2. But there's limitations, and really you shouldn't be trying to update the data through the view. It's not a good idea. Um, Views are considered dynamic because they're not related to the physical schema. It calls the schema on the fly. So when the data in the table changes, the view changes automatically. Why? Because the view doesn't store any data. It just stores a definition for an existing query. And every time you call the view, it runs the underlying query every single time. So it's always fresh, at least in MariaDB and MySQL. There's another flavor of views that, proper database servers have. Okay. Views have distinct advantages. They can fight complex queries, like if you have a really big query that you have to run all the time, and then you end up having to add to it and take things away from it regularly, like you need to add another table, take a table out, whatever. You can basically create it and treat it like a table so you can avoid a lot of the complexity. You can use it as a way to limit access to the underlying data, as in you can create a view that the application uses instead of straight select statements. You could tell it select from the view, not select straight from the table. And that way you can actually hide things from the application. So when somebody tries to get clever and tries to do some wonderful injection attacks, if you're hitting a view, you could actually have the view basically say, no, this is all you're allowed to see. Um, it allows for computed columns. It allows for backwards compatibility. Specifically, that one happens when you have a database server where the table structure has had to change, but you have applications out in the wild and you can't change those applications all the time. Therefore, if you need to make changes to the structure of the database, you can create views, keep the old structure in place for the applications, and then just change what's under the hood. Um, if you are changing the schema, at least you don't have to change anything in the application, which is good. Today, with most applications being web-based, it's not as much of a concern because you update your web code and it's there for the most part. Um, but in the old days when you had desktop client applications, you, and you needed to push out an update to everybody, You had to do it so that people weren't allowed to run the application unless they had the new version, and that would be bad because maybe they can't get the update right away, et cetera, et cetera. So there are a few quirks. Query view be slower. Realistically, it's usually not, but there's always a risk of it being a tiny little bit slower. Um, Making changes to the table and database means you need to update the views. So if you rename a column, you have to update views that refer to that column. Otherwise, the views are just going to break. It basically adds more maintenance so that every time you do work, changes and stuff, you have to make sure you do it everywhere. But it might lower the application maintenance depending on what's happening. So, that's some of the perks. Okay. Now I'm going to do a few demos. Actual fact, let me just get rid of the theory first and then I'll do the demos. So how do they work? So we're going to talk MariaDB specifically here. So when you run the query, MariaDB creates a temporary table in memory that matches the view definition. The data is copied into this temp table, and then the rest of the query operates against it. So it literally grabs the results, makes a temporary table in memory, and then if you have other stuff happening against it, it operates against this temporary table, not the actual data. So there's always going to be a few milliseconds of lag in the sense that once you've started the view and it creates a temp table in memory, it no longer sees the real data. So whereas when you run a normal query, it queries what the exact state is then. When you do a view, there's always a chance, however microscopic, that there'll be a slight lag between the actual data in the database and the view. Um, so, you know, so when views are defined, it's actually usually given a version. Um, each time the view is altered, a new version is changed. A backup of views created in the database, depending on your database engine. MariaDB actually keeps track of the old versions. MySQL does not. Postgres does not. I think Oracle does. So it depends. This feature depends on what server you're working with. A view can be made up of other views. And that I have seen where you've got the tables and you have a view. You have half a dozen views. Then you have a view that calls that half dozen views, and there's another view. And then you get like a view on top of a view on top of a view just to hide the underlying table structure because reasons. Um, Not a good plan, but I've seen it done. Um, yeah, normally you want to try to avoid nesting views if you can, because in theory, you could have the outside view and the table, and they're fine, but the middle view changes, but the outside view fails because it has to be recreated to match the new structure. So you end up with this cascading set of dependencies. And with databases, you try to avoid as many dependencies as you can because the fact that the data is already relational is enough of a dependency. Adding dependency on dynamic objects is not a good plan. Okay, so there are some restrictions when you create views. For example, you cannot create an index on a view. You guys will learn about indexes in level 2, but um, essentially it uses what's called an index from the underlying tables. Subqueries cannot be used in the from clause uh, of the select statement used to define the view. Again, I'm going to put an asterisk on that. That depends on what database server you're talking about. MySQL and MariaDB have limitations. Postgres and Oracle and Microsoft SQL Server do not. You just basically have to find out what your server supports that you're working with. Um, so what the big problem is if you make a change to the underlying table of the view, it'll make the change to the table and not even warn you that there might be views because it doesn't know these views depend on it. The views have no actual linked dependencies. They're just a bookmark. And I'm sure you've all had the experience where you have a bookmark and then you go click on it and you get a 404. because they changed the structure of the site or changed the URL. That's essentially what's going to happen. You change the table structure, you try to run the view, and it goes, bruh, the stuff I'm looking for is not there anymore. Error. Um, Simple views are the ones that can be updated in the sense of if you're going to update the underlying data through the view, only simple ones can be updated because if it gets too complicated, you're going to have problems. Um, and views that are defined by join subqueries can't be updated because the second you have a subquery, you can't do inner updates. Okay, so there's actually 22 pages of theory in this, but I'm going to jump to the samples. All right, to create a view, it's like create table, but it's create view. You give it a name. No, you don't have to prefix it with a V. That's just one of my own habits. Um, so I'm going to create a view. It's airport countries. By the way, I'm playing with the flights database. Um, Let me rephrase that. I'll be, I will be playing with the flight database. There we go. Um, no. All right, so I'm going to create a view called v underscore airport countries. And essentially what it's doing is it's going to grab the airport ID, the name of the airport, and the country it operates out of. Well, it exists in. And it's going to be a join. Normally, before you create the view, you want to make sure your query works. So when you have a tool like Data Grip, you can select it and just run that piece. And you can double check to make sure that your data is good, which looks fine. So now I'm going to change this and run the whole view. Oh, so got an error. I usually do this on purpose and I forgot to do it to actually do it on purpose today. I did it by accident. It just goes to show how many times I've taught this kind of stuff. Um, you'll notice duplicate column name. Why? Because when you creates the temporary table in memory, each column has to have a unique name. And right now I've got two columns called names. So it's saying, yeah, there's a duplicate. So I'm just going to rename it to country. And now I'm going to recreate my view. No error messages. Now I'm going to go select star from V airport countries. There's the view. And I'm going to run this. And we have the exact same behavior, except now one of my columns is renamed. Um, this is much shorter than that. Still a really simple example because I'm only sticking to two tables, but if I had a query that went 4 or 5 joins with a bunch of where clauses and some transformations and stuff, it could be a challenge. Now, if I want to change the structure of the view, you can do create or replace. Now, this is where I always put a caveat, an asterisk, you know, danger here. Depending on your database engine, when you change the underlying query, you need to make sure you keep the same number of columns. For example, with Postgres, at least up till version 11 of Postgres. I'm not sure if it's still around the newer versions. You can't do a create or replace a view if you're changing the number of columns coming out of it. You have to drop the view and then recreate it. MariaDB is not picky that way. So I could, in theory, add countries.id as country ID, and I'm going to run this. It didn't complain, and now I am going to grab this because I'm lazy and I don't type it. Want to type again? Now I've got my country ID. So I changed my view, kept the same name, added a new column to it because I realized I needed the other column for whatever reason. Um, so as you can see, the view's there. It's the same thing as always. There's nothing special about it. It acts like a table. You're just defining it ahead of time so that you can just reuse it. Like I said before, you can treat a view just like a normal table. So if I go select star from the airport countries, join routes on uh, v airport countries dot id is equal to routes dot source airport ID. And I'm going to run this. And now you can see there's the routes that match the ID of the airport here will match the source airport ID. So for each row. So create a view, you can use it in a join. Why? Because it's basically another table that you can't change the data in. Again, going back to the whole thing of I want to update an app. I want to update my database structure, but not update the applications. In theory, we could replace a table with this view, replace the table with a view, and then it would still work in the application with the joins and everything that the application may have, because as far as this is concerned, the structure hasn't changed. So it's cool. You can also use the view in a subquery. I'm just going to go select star from routes where destination airport ID in select ID from where country is equal to Canada. Let me just put this on 2 lines. Okay, 3 lines so that it fits. Oops. My semicolon here. And I'm going to run this one. And we are getting the routes for countries in Canada. So as you can see, I can use the view, even including the whatever it is, right? So if I go, these are all the airport IDs in Canada. And now I'm telling it, hey, I want to know all the flights that land in that subset. So you can use it in a subquery. It's fine. You can actually use it in the from clause. That'll work too. Yes, that should work. There's all kinds of things you can do with it. Now, I already have this other query written, just because I wanted it pre-made. You can create your aggregates in the view so that you don't have to remember to do it. So I'm going to run this one, and of course it already exists because it's leftovers from last semester. Hang on. Country airport count, this one here. Try that again. So I'm going to create this view. That error is because I tried to create something with the same name twice. You're not allowed to do that. So I can now go select star from this, and there's my number of airports by country. And in theory, we could go The airline's connected to the country. So if we run this one, we are still pulling from this view, even though it has an aggregate in it. We're ignoring the aggregate just to show that, you don't need to use all the columns in a view. You can just use whatever parts of it you want. And you can get it to do the math for you if you want. So yeah, um, so this view works. This one works. That's essential parts of creating a view and using a view. There's more to it, and there's more styles of views. But like I said, it's being covered in level 2. Um, so it'll be week 5 of level 2. I've taught level 2 of this course, this program, a lot more than the first half. All right, let me switch back to the rest of the slides. Um, okay, so when you name a view, um, you have to be careful when you name it because it shares the same namespace. In other words, views and tables share the same uh, scope. You guys learned about scope yet? Eh, No, not namespaces, but scoping. You know how you have a variable inside of a function that's not accessible outside the function because it only exists inside the function? That's called a scope. In a database, the namespace is a scope. So basically, views and tables share the same scope as far as naming goes. Therefore, you can't have two objects with the same name. Um, a view has to follow table naming conventions. Sure. Depending what conventions you happen to be using. For example, in the world database, create view city would not be allowed because there's already a table called city, which you guys witnessed me do by accident. Um, okay, so there is two kinds of the view engines in um, MariaDB, and one's called temp table, one's called merge. They do different things. They perform differently. The merge is slower, but it's more up to date than the temp table. This just shows a more complex example. So when you say show full tables, so hang on, let me go pull that up. So if I go show full tables and I run this, no, that's not what I want you to do. You'll see that you got base tables and views. Base table is a normal table. A view is, well, it's a view. There's nothing magical there. So anything that's a view is considered not updatable unless you've taken special steps to make it updatable. Now you already demonstrated how to query from the view. You can use joins. I showed you guys that. I showed you guys this also. This is just a really complicated query that you can run. Not sure. I know it works. So if you guys feel like copy pasting this and see what it does, it's cool. So the perk is, like I said before, the view can make simple, a lot of complicated queries more simple to use. Okay, so when you do a create or replace, you can change the algorithm. You'll notice that in this example, the algorithm's in square brackets. Yes, brackets. Because it's optional. The default mode is temp table, if I remember correctly. You normally what you do is you just say use undefined. That way it'll use whatever's been defined as the default in your database server, because that's probably the best choice, is just let the database server do what it wants to do. That way you'll have fewer problems later. Um, the only time you really want to do, you want to specify it is if you need a very specific performance. The merge is more memory intensive. The temp table is more IO intensive. So one uses up more memory, one slaughters your disk access. But the temp table lets you do big things. The merge doesn't. Oh yes, very important. If you want to get rid of a view, it's drop view. You probably want to include if exists just for shits and giggles. That way you won't get an error if you try to drop something that doesn't exist, and you give it the name. So if I wanted, for example, to drop this view, I can go drop view if exists, give it the name, and the view is gone. The drop is instant because it really doesn't take up any room in the database. It takes up the room of the characters for the query plus the name and a little bit of things. Um, it also doesn't drop the underlying tables. It doesn't damage the data because you're getting rid of a view, not the actual table structure. Okay. So that's pretty much it for views. Um, what's going to happen next week is I'm going to talk about next week now. Next week, I'm going to cover the last of the lecture material. It's going to be, again, pretty quick like this one was, about half an hour. And then I'm going to talk about the exam. I just need to go review it because it's written. I wrote it, and I decided I was going to create it and then wait a week and then go look at it again. So I don't have to tell you guys, question 22, the answer is A. Trying to avoid doing that a second time this semester. Uh, um, and but it's multiple choice on paper. You get more time to do it technically because it's not during class time. It's a separate exam time. Because during exam week, the exam you have your normal classes till uh, so normal classes through the week of April 7th. Starting on the 12th is exam season. So from the 12th to the 18th is exams. Skipping the 13th because there's no exams on a Sunday. But yes, you may have an exam on a Saturday. You definitely want to check Access and check your exam schedule because it has happened in the past where I had a student contact me an hour into the exam going, "Sir, you know where this is going, right? I didn't realize the exam was on Saturday." And my response was, "Did you not come to class? Because I told you guys 3 times in class." Uh, my exact words. No, you don't get to have a makeup because it's announced in your Brightspace. It's announced in Brightspace. It's in Access. So the good news is ours is not on a Saturday. Be thankful. The CST8260 students, so the level 1 database course for computer programmer, programmer analyst, and engineering technology, 8 a.m. on Saturday. Yeah. I'm pretty sure it's 8. Might be 9, but I've had to proctor that exam many times, and it was almost always 8 a.m. Seeing the number of students almost falling asleep standing up in the hall is hilarious. Um, so ours is on the 17th. Hang on. But I'm not that I don't believe you, but I'm gonna go double check that. Um, yes, right there. Just with some nice big letters. April 17th at 1800 hours or 6 p.m. for the North American folks. Um, so it's good. The other thing that you need to be aware of is yes, you're going to have a practical assessment. Hang on, back to April. It'll be on the 10th. No, 2 weeks. You have to get this lab, out of the way. Otherwise, you want to have. I'll be doing the same thing as I did last time. So next week, I'll be releasing a previous version of the practical assessment. I strongly recommend you try it because I threw it at the students last semester without a practice and they struggled. The grades weren't terrible, but I saw a lot of unhappy people during that test. Um, Over 60% of the class went to the last minute of the 2 hour lab period. It's not that it's super hard. It's a database you haven't seen before, but I'm going to give it to you next week. So you can't say you didn't have a chance to look at it. You will be given a practice test that refers to that database. And is it my fault if you don't look at that practice test and or look at the contents of that database? No, I'm not going to feel bad for you this semester. I felt bad for them last semester because I read through the questions. I'm like, this is easy. I've also been working with database for 28 years, right? So I had a stupid moment where I really didn't associate the true difficulty level because I had inherited the test from the previous prof. I'm like, no. So I'll be giving you guys a practice test and the sample database and the instructions next week. So you'll have literally an entire week with, and the lab is like microscopic. That that gets issued next week. So yeah, you want to do that practice. You want to make sure it's loaded before you come to class. Because I had that last semester too, where a person came in and said, "Sir, I didn't have a chance to upload the database. I gave it to you 2 weeks ago. What's your excuse?" Yeah, and now you're not getting extra time because there's another class behind us. So too bad. And yeah, so I'll be giving you guys the practice test next week. I might even release it this week, just so you guys have it. I just got to go decide which one I'm going to give you guys as your practice versus the real one. I just haven't looked at it yet. So I'll release the instructions for the final practical assessment. As last time, you'll have 1 hour, 50 minutes to do it. Probably going to take you most of that unless you practiced. If you practiced ahead of time, you might get through it pretty darn quick. It depends on, if you take the time to practice. Um, Now, what else is happening? Like next week, I'm covering odds and ends of functions. So some string functions and date functions and stuff that are handy to know. They're just utility functions. So substring functions, uppercase, lowercase, that kind of thing. It's pretty quick. It's just a quick little demo of the different functions. Um, yeah. So that's what's coming up next week. Um, so it'll be the demo for the first half. I'll be talking about the exam breakdown the second half. Um, as you've noticed, if I'm hitting the content and the whatever here, realistically, I don't have any lecture content for the 10th. Just saying. I'm going to be here because, well, I have to be here. If you want to come here because you have questions, it gives you an hour to get those last minute questions out of your system. Otherwise, I'll just be sitting here grading. Yes. Yes and no. Um, the problem is that some of the topics that we covered after the break assumes you know what happened for the break. Like you have to know how to do a select and you have to understand how an aggregate works to be able to answer some of the questions because if you don't know the material from part A, you won't be able to answer some of the questions in part B. Like, oh, this is a join type question and it asks you about the select part. And you have to know that. Technically, it focuses on the second half, but it assumes you understand the material from the first half. It's not like, what's the word I'm looking for? Actually, your level 2 course, it could be 2 separate courses. What you do from weeks 1 to like 5? You have a test and then you just forget it for the second half, which is cool because it's designed that the course can be easily swapped between profs at the halfway mark. Um, but this one assumes a fair amount of you remembering the general concepts from the first half to be able to do the exam for the second half. In other words, you know how to read a select statement, the questions about views, that kind of thing. I'll go over it in more detail next week. But yeah, no, you can send me an email and I'll try to find your exam. I got to remember where I put them. I'm pretty sure I know where I put them. They're stuffed in a corner. And then I got to dig out your exam and I'll bring it, but you don't get to keep it. Just saying. Uh, so if you do want to see your old exam, send me an email and we can either go through it on the 10th when I'm sitting here with nothing to teach, or in theory, come to lab like on the 3rd. Just tell me before so I remember to grab it and we can go through it during the lab period if you want to take a quick look at what happened. Yep. The midterm and the final exams evenly split. Um, yeah, hang on. I'm just going to, can't do it through this because then you see everybody's grades. There's a, there you go. No, you have one of each. So the practical exam will be during your last lab period, which will be the April 10th, and your theory exams on April 17th. So you have your, it's not like the midterm where you wrote your midterm and then half an hour later you write your final, your practical. This one you write your practical. Then you get a whole week before you write your theory. She's like, ooh, relief. Okay, so any other questions? No. First one wasn't open book either. Yeah, the practical, yes. Oh, yeah, I thought you were asking for the theory. No, no, the practical, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, the practical. I mean, you're sitting at your laptops. I can't stop you from looking at shit on your screen. I mean, I could do that too, sit at the back of the class like this, and I'm like, bring my binoculars? It's like I can see fairly clearly at a distance. Anything there, I can't. I'm like, yeah, I'll sit back there. Like, no, I mean, I constantly have to look things up on the internet when I'm working. Because the goes about, it makes sense for it to be closed book. But for things like SQL, there's not that much you need to look up usually anyways because the IDE finishes a lot of it for you, right? Yeah, well, it's a bit like, well, I use the JetBrains tools, right? I I ripped out the plugin in DataGrip. I still have it in PHP Storm because some of the projects I work with are sitting at like 65,000 lines of code, and remembering what that function does that I created 4 years ago. I just let the AI go grab it for me. You could. It's happened. But yeah. All right. So that's pretty much it. If there's no further questions, I'll let you guys run. Again, if you come to lab tonight, great. If you don't, fine. I'm just actually going to go pull up the lab for you guys so you guys can see that even tonight's lab is fairly straightforward. I was actually checking the lab contents just before lecture today because I'm like, I should go double check this stuff. Lab 9. Lab 9. Create a view. Retrieve the names. This is using the Sakilla database. Um, from the previous view, do this. Create a new view. Now use that view. So realistically, you're only actually writing 2 brand new SQL statements. And then the rest of them you're just tacking on to the view. So you use the view with the view, just like I did in the examples. It's fairly straightforward. Do not overthink the questions. Um, I fixed some of the wording last semester. It's still a little wonky. I'm more worried about if you can demonstrate the spirit of the question than trying to worry about getting the question. If you can demonstrate you understand what the question's asking and you're able to make it work, like, hey, look at this. I used my view in a join and the join pretty much retrieves what I asked for, I'll be happy. I'm not nitpicking on, oh, the columns are in the wrong order, or I'm not doing that. But you guys have received your grades from me already. You know I'm not particularly nitpicky about some of that stuff. So don't think it. Oh, filter just means where clause. Yeah, not the only one. But yeah, filter just means, build a rule that matches this. Yeah. All right. That's it, folks. Stop the